This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome to the show. It's Tuesday. I always look forward to this because it's a chance to talk to my friend Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Eric, how are you today?
Oh, I'm good. And I've got good news for all the young people out there. Trump is going to make buying a house more affordable. You may have caught the news that they floated a 50-year mortgage. So, you get a mortgage when you're 25, and by the time you're 75, yay, light the candles. You might finally have paid off your mortgage just in time to check into the old folks' home.
Oh, my goodness. Well, gee, I'd kind of like to get one and just, prolong my life till I'm 110. Why not?
Well, it's interesting to me because it literally is the embodiment of the whole you will own nothing and be happy. And it's being delivered to us by, of all people, Trump.
Yeah. Well, and okay, is there an upside to a 50-year mortgage? Because
No.
I'm asking sincerely. I don't know what it would be.
Well, it depends. It depends on innumeracy. It depends on people believing, oh, the monthly payment is more manageable. They don't seem to understand that they're probably going to end up paying 3 times or more the principal in interest over that period of time. So it's a kind of an indenture, a compound indenture. You're given the illusion of being a homeowner, because they'll assign that term to you because technically your name is on a piece of paper, but you're not going to own anything for the duration of that loan. You're just going to be paying. And, the idea that this is going to somehow make things more affordable is risible, because if you're constantly paying for the next 50 years, you're going to have less money to pay for other things, at least under the current regime. Let's say you get a 30-year mortgage. And after 30 years, hey, at least I don't have a mortgage payment. I still have to pay that property tax, but at least I don't have a mortgage payment. And that kind of balances things a little bit more in your favor in terms of, hey, I've got some more money to pay for food. And, maybe I can finally get a new car to replace my rattle-trap 25-year-old car. So I see this as just another way for them to pluck the chicken, or the goose, I guess. You don't pluck chickens, you pluck geese. And to try to keep the goose from realizing that he's being plucked. I think it's tragic. There are so many better ways to deal with this business of houses becoming completely unaffordable. Like, I don't know, dealing with inflation for one thing.
Right.
Which brings us to the next thing. They're floating the idea of cutting yet another stimmy check. And the reason that you and I and everybody else are paying $60 for a bag of groceries that cost us $30 5 years ago has greatly to do with the fact that during COVID, they thought it would be a fine idea for all the people who couldn't work and who had lost their businesses. Here, we'll just send out stimulus checks. And that's what they're talking about doing again now.
And I know that they use fancy words, there's a whole new speak dictionary when it comes to the monetary system, but quantitative easing, remember hearing that over the years?
Sure.
And essentially, as I understand it, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, Eric, quantitative easing essentially was we print and circulate billions or maybe trillions of dollars, basically get that money out into the economy to stimulate, the spending that needs to take place. But like you alluded to earlier, it also makes inflation just that much worse by further diluting the purchasing power of every single dollar.
It's even worse than that. It's a form of economic musical chairs in that the people who are in the know, okay, they know, all right, we're going to flood the money with funny money, or flood the economy with funny money. They can leverage that and take advantage of it before the devaluation of the currency happens. So, the ordinary rank and file people, you and I, by the time it filters down to us, our perk is, oh, we have a little more money, but everything costs more. So, it's a really ingenious way to tax people and do it without them understanding that they have been taxed. And by the way, Trump is saying, oh, this is going to be a rebate for all of the money that has been collected by the federal government in tariffs. Well, do people not understand that these tariffs are taxes? So Trump is basically saying, yeah, I made your life more expensive by adding a tax to everything, but I just call it a tariff. And now I'm going to throw you a small check, $2,000. That's really going to appreciably affect your living standard. I did a quick calculation about inflation, which is currency devaluation. And let's say you have a family and you've been paying about $200 a month more for groceries, which I think is a lowball estimate, as a result of inflation in a month. If you add that up over 5 years, that's more than $12,000. So, that's what you're getting. You're getting a $2,000 stimmy check to try to make things better for you after the government has made your life $12,000 more expensive. And that's just counting groceries.
I, I don't want to sound like I'm a nitpicker, but that just angers me that the political class believes, you know what, you're that easily distracted, Brian. All we have to do is wave the stimmy check and you'll just fall into line. Sadly, though, I think that's what a lot of people are going to do.
I think so, absolutely. And I think it's not a coincidence that Trump is doing it now, dangling the stimmy check. I think that the recent elections were a kind of wake up call to Trump and his people. They are beginning to intuit that there's a growing fury out there about promises not delivered on. And the people are really suffering and they're angry. They're tired of the budget being open and unlimited in terms of sending aid to Ukraine, in terms of sending aid to Israel, aid to
Yep.
anybody except the United States, except the American people. We're constantly being expected to pay for everything else except our own well being. And people are tired of it. They're not buying this mantra. Trump had the effrontery to say there's almost zero inflation. He actually said that the other day. And the
And
economy is booming, doing great. Yeah, it's doing great. If you're a Wall Street billionaire, if you're a member of the corporate oligarchy that is profiting from all of this, but ordinary people who actually work for a living and collect a check, they're not doing so well.
no, that makes sense. And I that's probably a big source of my frustration is the political class. I don't care if it's Donald Trump or, Joe Biden or the cackler. They lie. And this is just more deception. And, you have to wonder, it can't go on forever. But who's going to be the one brave enough to say this can't go on? Thomas Massey tries to, but then he gets lumped in with the troublemakers like you know what's her name from Somalia or what's her name?
Yeah,
Or-
Ilhan Omar.
yes.
Yeah, the entire Trump machine is devoting everything it can to primary Massey out of office. Massey, who's a solid conservative, a solid Republican, they're going after him, which gives you an idea of the state of the Republican Party. And of course, they're doing it because he's had the audacity to raise his hand, kind of like Tucker Carlson has done, and said, well, why are we throwing all this money to Israel? Israel's more affluent than we are. You look at the per capita income of the average Israeli, you look at Israeli cities, which are nice and clean and modern. They've got all these amenities. Why are we driving around on potholed streets in broken down old cars and trying to figure out how to pay our utility bills while we're shoveling all this money at Israel? And it's not just Israel, it's Ukraine, all these countries. Why are we responsible for the rest of the world? But to raise that question somehow paints you as an enemy of MAGA and an anti Semite. And people have had it. They've had enough. Even Tucker Carlson, who's a very moderate guy, he's in all kinds of trouble right now for daring to speak with Nick Fuentes about the thing. The Heritage Foundation's president has been effectively forced out of his job for coming to Tucker Carlson's defense. Did you hear about that?
I had not heard about that. No. What happened?
Yeah, well, he said essentially that Tucker's got a right to criticize aid to a foreign government. That's not necessarily anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Jewish to say that. It's a legitimate question. Well, within 24 hours, he had to backpedal on that and say, "Oh no, my statement was produced by an aide, and I didn't really look at it closely." And he's essentially having to do the mea culpa apology tour now. And I don't know whether you caught
Mm.
the interview with Fuentes that Tucker had, but it was very moderate, very reasonable. It wasn't a Der Stürmer kind of meeting ranting about Jews. It was simply pointing out, look, this business with the influence of the Israeli Zionist government over the politics of this country is completely out of hand. And you see Mark Levin, just literally losing his mind about it. That anybody who dares to say anything at all, even slightly critical of what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing, is somehow Adolf Hitler.
I thought we were going to say Benjamin Shapiro because he's
Him
another
too.
one out there that just beats the drum. And yeah, we've been painted into a corner, and sadly, it works. There are a lot of people who are just like, oh, that's a third rail. We just don't touch. There was an initiative that took place here. I think it was last month. 50 states, one Israel. Have you heard about this?
I have. Yes.
They
Horrible.
flew five of Idaho's state legislators. These are state lawmakers. They flew them to Israel. They got to kiss the wall. They got to, you know, go through the whole spiel of the tour of here's what you're supposed to think and here's what you're supposed to say. And no one can reliably say anything about that because if you do, you get lumped in with Nick Fuentes or
Yep.
Stormfront or whatever. It's It's very sad because there are some legitimate reasons to question. Why would Israel want access to my state
Of course.
lawmakers?
Well, the good news as I see it is that I think it's losing its puissance, to use a fancy word. People are tired of it. They're tired of the catcalling and how every single time any reasonable person, asks an entirely legitimate question and does it in a way that's not obnoxious. They're just, hey, I'd like to know why. All of a sudden they are equated with a Sieg Heiling Nazi. It's tiresome. People are seeing through it. And I think they realize that people are seeing through it. They being, these Zionist shills for the state of Israel, including Shapiro and Levin and all those guys, and the neocon establishment itself. And they are becoming hysterical because they've lost control of it. I think, they maybe hoped that after Charlie Kirk was killed, that, it would go back to just, sort of cucked milk toast establishment GOP rhetoric, and nobody would be asking any questions anymore. That hasn't happened. If anything, the question asking has gotten a little bit more ardent, and these are good things. It's time these questions were not only asked, but that we got answers to them.
Yeah, and the whole Charlie Kirk thing, I guess I'm off the reservation, so I might as well just go ahead and enjoy the ride here.
Yep.
But I have never seen so much concerted effort and Newsmax is primarily the place I'm seeing this. These ads that pop up on social media from Newsmax. Well, of course, Charlie Kirk loved Israel, and here's the proof. And it's like there is so much effort and so much money being spent to promote how much Charlie loved Israel, and not that he ever questioned any things that its government might be doing. I know I'm on the receiving end of some kind of a psyop or propaganda campaign, and I'm just asking why? Why is it so
For
important?
all their usual adroitness, they're mishandling things. They've been mishandling that from the very beginning. Within what, an hour, I think, of the actual assassination, you had Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of a state, coming out publicly and say, "Oh, we had nothing to do with it. We had nothing to do with it."
Curious.
It
Yeah, I
didn't
mean,
look good.
I know if something bad happens, my day isn't right until I've gone before the cameras and denied that I had anything to do with that.
Yeah. And so
Uh,
instead of being measured and reasonable about the whole thing, they have gone off the rails with it, and they are now at the point, I think, of looking as ridiculous. And I'm going to go way back in time here as Al Sharpton. When during the time when he was still wearing the jogging suit with the with the clock around his neck and all of that, and screaming, yelling in his bouffant hairdo on the Maury Povich show. I think we've arrived at that point with regard to the Zionist stuff.
All right. Well, for those who tuned in today thinking I'm going to get an affirmation that we're on the right path politically and that everything's going to be fine, we've probably dashed your hopes. But let's face it, the truth is worth facing, and sometimes that's hard truth. And I think the bottom line here, Eric, you correct me if you don't agree with this. We've got to get through our heads. Nobody is coming to save us. Not Trump, not MAGA, not Rand Paul, not Thomas Massey. No one is coming to save us from the political class. So it's probably a good idea for us to get busy and do what we can on our own to shore up our position because the political class, let's just say they have other priorities.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, at least in my own case, voting for Trump, which is the last time I'm ever going to vote in a presidential election again, was a big, hard pill to choke down. I let my hope overcome my judgment. And I thought that despite all of the things that he had done and all of the indications, the factual things that I could look at and say, this guy's not very trustworthy. He's duplicitous. He's erratic. He's unprincipled. I thought, well, maybe we'll be able to make America great again. We'll get things going in the right direction. Well, not only are things not going in the right direction, I think they're going in even the worse direction than they might have if the alternative, which isn't really an alternative, had won. So I felt clean a week or so ago when I elected to sit out the election in my state and have nothing to do with it. And as you say, focus on our own lives, focus on our own networks, our own things, and stop looking to these politicians to save us because, as you say, they aren't going to.
And people, it's like the crabs in a bucket. The people who are true believers in whatever brand of politics, they believe in at the moment. Our lack of faith is very disturbing to them. When you refuse to participate in the reassurance ritual of voting, Eric, you're part of the problem. You're the reason why things are the way that they are. When to a thinking person, no, you just withdrew your consent because it's clear that no matter who you vote for, in the words of Tom Woods, we still get John McCain every
Yeah, but
time.
it takes a little while to realize that. I'm quite sympathetic to that point of view because it's just such a tough position to be in. You see important issues being bruited about on the public stage, and you very much want, if you're the kind of American who wants a liberty kind of society, a free society, you want to fight for those things. And how do you do that? We're not picking up our muskets and going out to the common green. So you think, well, I'm going to vote for this person because it looks like that person might incline toward the right point of view on the topic. So you feel almost an obligation to do it, and every single time you end up feeling like Charlie Brown kicking the football when Lucy pulls it away. Every single time.
This might be a good time to segue into the free oil change scam that I know you just published. Talk about the pulling the football away here, but this was a great article. Talk to me a little bit about what we need to be aware of when it comes to the free oil change.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not free. A lot of the car manufacturers will tout that if you buy their vehicle, included in the purchases, free oil changes and tire rotations and all this, we'll give you a 25-point check. It's not free. You're paying for it when you buy the car. That's the first point. If you doubt that, tally up what it would cost you to have your car's oil changed over, say, 3 years and all these other services, and use that as a negotiating tactic with the salesman and ask them to deduct the cost of all of that. Of course, they're not going to. So you're paying for it in that way. But you may also be paying for it in other ways. One of the things that I actually should have added this to the article and didn't think to at the time. It's a means by which they get your car into the service bay. And then a lot of times, and the sexist comment coming, they're going to do this a lot to women, but men are just as vulnerable these days because a lot of men really don't have any mechanical knowledge. So, the service advisor will come rushing out from the bays and say, oh my gosh, we found X, Y, and Z. Your car needs to have this because it's not safe if you don't get this fixed or this taken care of. And oftentimes it's absolutely nothing. For example, all engines tend to seep oil over time. We're not talking about like a hemorrhage or a massive puddle. We're talking about, oh, look, I was able to stick my finger on the crankcase underneath the car and I got some oil in my finger. But a lot of people will see that as if it was a hemorrhage. And so they'll say, oh, okay, they'll agree to have their oil pan gasket replaced for $1,000 or something like that. That isn't necessary, but they've been convinced that it is by the service advisor, who, by the way, makes commissions in a lot of dealerships, just like a car salesman. That's how he makes his living. The other thing is, and this is a really important thing to understand, when you take your car into service at a dealership, typically the person who's doing the monkey work, the oil changes and the tire rotations, very basic things like that, that's not a trained mechanic. They don't take a trained mechanic and have him do oil changes in the pit. That guy's their earner. He's the guy who does the major service work that they actually make money on. Your free oil change is being done by some guy, and I'm not maligning him. You got to start somewhere if you want to work on cars. So they hire some kid right out of high school, and they give him a few basic instructions. That bolt, take that bolt out, put the oil in. The point is, he's young, he's inexperienced, he may not really be particularly competent, and the odds of something going wrong are actually fairly high. So it's really important to do your due diligence and check to see whether the oil was actually changed. Look on your dipstick, see whether it was changed to the right level, not too full, not too little. And then before you drive off the lot, maybe look underneath the car to see if your engine is in fact now gushing oil on the ground so that you can get it corrected before you leave the dealer's lot.
No, that's sound advice. And my son, I'm very proud of him, has learned to do oil changes. And so I got to go down today and I've got to go buy a new oil plug, drain pan plug. Because the shop, the last time I took it in, did a really good job at rounding off the bolt there. So
yeah.
But it's awesome to have the ability to do that yourself. And my son is not a mechanic. He doesn't have a full tool set up or a lift or anything like that. But he makes he does pretty good, about 20 minutes or so, and that oil's changed. And anyway, useful skill to have, and it sounds like it could prevent you from being taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point. It used to be our generation. This was a common thing that people ordinarily did. In other words, you didn't have to be a gearhead, a mechanic. You just kind of did your own basic maintenance because it saved you money and you knew the job was done correctly. And it gave people proficiency. It gave people a sense of being able to do things, particularly kids. It was, I think, a valuable thing when a father could take his kid out in the garage or out on the pad in front of the garage and show him how to change the oil. So the kid knew how to do that. Just like, it's a good thing that a kid knows how to deal with a flat tire. Just basic things that are part of owning a vehicle, instead of where we are now, where people are completely prostrate and at the mercy of these dealers for everything. So they're paying through the nose for all of these things when they could be saving a lot of money, and also just feeling more confident that they know something about how their vehicle works, and that if something does happen, that they can maybe probably handle it, or at least know how to handle it.
And of course, there's always the caution too. Anything free, beware. It's
Yes.
kind of like, don't buy a TV from an out of breath guy on the street.
That's great. That's a good one.
Common sense there. Eric, great as always to visit with you. Keep up the great work and keep inspiring us to stay free despite the efforts of those who would like to take it away.
Will do. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate you having me on.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.